Okay. Nothing? There it goes. Okay.
Yeah, he's got it.
What I used to do is just clip it onto my belt structure. Okay, and we do have, I've got you at, okay, mic level, that's good. Okay, it's on now. Just go.
Hello?
So go again.
Hello?
That's not bad. I think they're probably matched up pretty
Okay.
good. If you do need to turn yours up.
Yes, so often you guys pass back.
This game level here, this is the one that's controlling you. This is your football. And now this is your this here is your game control here. Find okay. Super. Thank you very much. All right, folks, let's get started. I feel like I'm in the Space Odyssey, but that's a really dated reference. I think I'm not sure if I'm speaking to the video audience or the live audience when I'm speaking in both. Okay. All right. Well, I'm Locke Fraser, and I should be Louis Gosselin. I should have introduced myself as Louis Gosselin. He should be here because Louis typically organizes the winter semester, but he's on sabbatical. I see him in the audience though, so yeah. Well, welcome back to another semester of the Environmental Science Seminar Series. We have a fantastic lineup for you, and you can notice on this front slide here that we are open for business as well. And I'm reaching out, to the video audience because who knows who's listening in and who wants to support this series. We have a great series coming up. After this week, we have Sariana Patterson. She's a postdoc at TRU, and she is really driving this new initiative called Knowledge Makers, reconnecting with Indigenous research practices. We don't have a talk on the 31st. On February 7th, we have Jose Ramon from the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada Summerland Research Station, talking on plant pathology. Mike Cardwell from UC San Diego. Let's hear it for the rattlesnakes. We have Hind, who will be discussing her chemistry on arsenicals. John Wagner, I keep forgetting, what is John Wagner doing? Some sort of sport thing. The title will be announced soon. He's from UBCO. Nancy Turner is an acclaimed ethnobotanist from UVic. And Jordan Koch from McGill is going to give a talk on street hockey. So it's a very varied lineup, and please come. You're welcome all the time. And as you know, also, we are also doing this live stream, and it's going to be available on YouTube, and you can also go back to it because it's recorded. So after all that, I get to introduce our first speaker of the semester, Jaimie Dickson. Jaimie is the environmental supervisor at Tech Highland Valley Copper. I've known Jaimie for a few years now. We've been collaborating on various projects up at the mine. And just this past fall, Jaimie and her team presented this work at the Technical and Research Committee on Reclamation at Williams Lake, and it received the best paper presentation at the conference.
I didn't know that.
Oh, really? And it's live streamed as well. Oh my God. Can you rewind that last bit? Can I blame somebody else for this, Wendy? All right. Go, Jaimie. So, we're going to now hear about Jaimie's fascinating research that she's done. So let me give you and press this over.
Awesome. Well, thank you, guys. Again, I'm Jaimie Dickson. I'm Environment Supervisor at Highland Valley Copper. I've been working at Highland Valley Copper for about 14 years now, and my main areas of work are in land use planning and reclamation. Before I get started, I just want to acknowledge that we're on the traditional territory of the Secwepemc Nation, and want to thank the nation and TRU for having me here to speak about something that I feel is a really important topic in industry today. So I'm going to talk to you about a community-based project that HVC completed that we call the Returning Land Use Plan. So this is kind of an overview of the presentation. I'm going to give you a bit of overview of Highland Valley Copper's operations and community engagement strategy just to provide some context on our end land use plan, a little bit of the technical details around the end land use plan, but mainly the focus of this is the social side of the project and the importance of industry working collaboratively with the communities so that we can make these projects really meaningful to the people that have been impacted by the operation. Okay, so some general information about Highland Valley for you that don't know much about it. We're located on the traditional territory of the Nlaka'pamux Nation, and we border on the territory of the Secwepemc Nation. We're located about 80 kilometers from Kamloops between Logan Lake and Ashcroft. So if you've ever flown into Kamloops or driven that road, you won't miss us for sure. We're the largest non-ferrous metal mine in Canada, and we produce copper and molybdenum concentrate. The size of our operation in terms of hectares is about, our operations have disturbed approximately 7,000 hectares, so very large operation. Of that, we have reclaimed about 1,800 hectares. So this is just an aerial photo of our operation, and I just want to use it to provide a bit of a history. The current mine plan of Highland Valley Copper is to operate until 2028, but there's been a long history of mining in the valley. So, let's see. So I'll start off with the Bethlehem operation. So that's this area on the northern side of the highway. So the Bethlehem operation operated between 1962 and 1982. They operated from 3 open pits. And then there's associated waste rock dumps surrounding it and 2 tailing storage facilities. Mining ended in 1982, and we began reclaiming the area in the early 90s, and it's currently mainly reclaimed. Then came the Lornex operation. So this is our Lornex pit right here, and associated waste rock dumps around it. So mining started in 72, and it's still currently operating. Next up came the Highmont operation. The other pits are predominantly copper producing pits, and molybdenum is the main metal mined in these Highmont pits. They operated in Highmont from 1979 to 1984. At that time, the molybdenum prices went down, and the mine subsequently shut down, but then it reopened in 2005, and it's currently part of our operation. And lastly, our big pit, that's the Valley operation, started in about 1982 and is currently operating now. In 1986, the operations merged to create Highland Valley Copper. And we're all one operation now with one main tailings pond and mill. So now just a really quick mining 101, really to explain what wastes are created from the mining process and then subsequently what we are required to reclaim. So through drilling and modeling, Highland Valley has a really good understanding of the minerals that are in the ground. We refer to the mineralized rock, so the rock that has the metals in it, as ore, and all the other rock that we have to remove to get to the ore as waste rock. So the ore is mined from the walls of open pits. It's blasted to loosen it up. Then we have 8 of these really large shovels, and to put it into perspective, if I was standing at this track right here and had my arms in the air, it would be like maybe half to 3/4 of the height of that track. So we have 8 of those shovels that load our 240-ton haul trucks, and then from there the material is brought to one of 2 places. If it's ore, it's brought to our crushers, and if it's waste rock, it gets piled in what we call waste rock dumps. So the ore, once it gets to the crushers, it goes into the crusher and it's broken. The rock is broken down to about the size of a football. Then it goes onto conveyors, which you can see here, and then they run into stockpiles that we have covered with domes, just really essentially to reduce the dust off of those piles. And if anyone's been at Highland Valley Copper, you'll notice that it's the 2 outer ones are red and the middle one's white, and it makes up a big Canada flag, and we're actually the largest Canada flag in Canada, so that's our other claim to fame. So from there, the ore is fed into the mill. Essentially, it goes through one of 5 grinding lines to reduce it to about the size of sand. Then it goes through a flotation process where reagents are added to break up the minerals from the rock, and then frothers are added to essentially create bubbles. The minerals attached to the bubbles is brought to the surface, and then it's removed from the remainder of the material, and then it's dried to reduce the moisture content. And then in the end, we're left with both copper and molybdenum concentrate. And then from there, our copper concentrate is put on trucks, goes down to Ashcroft, gets loaded onto the rail cars and taken to Vancouver. The moly is bagged and then trucked directly to Vancouver. And then 80% of that, the concentrates are shipped overseas to markets over there, and the remainder staying within North America. So through the mining process, we're left with 3 general waste materials. So all the rock that doesn't contain the ore, our waste rock, is put in piles called waste rock dumps, and we have many of them around all of our pits. We also have a subcategory of waste rock that we refer to as overburden. So essentially it's just not the coarse rock, it's more like a mineral soil. And we've developed criteria that we put in place to dictate if that material is good for growing vegetation. And if it is, then we'll stockpile that material separately so that when the waste rock dumps are created, and with have really coarse rock, you can't grow anything in it, we cap it with the overburden, and that's how we start our reclamation process. The third waste is tailings material, which is the sand water slurry that's left over after the milling process. This is a picture here of a reclaimed tailings ponds. We have 3 reclaimed ones that were associated with some of the historic operations, and we currently have the one big one now. So, the tailings ponds and the waste rock dumps make up the majority of our land disturbance that we're required to reclaim. Mines are required to have what you call an end land use plan, and that really provides information on the intended post-closure uses for the land, and it's used as a conceptual high-level plan to guide the detailed reclamation planning. So HVC developed the original inland use plan in 1998, and I see that there's a couple people in this room that were involved in that original inland use plan, so would know a lot more about it than me. But in that plan we had three general land use categories. So the agricultural areas, so that's areas that we planted agronomic species so that we could create opportunities for cattle grazing and hay production. That makes up about 2/3 of the areas that we've reclaimed to date. And then the next area is wildlife habitat. So in those areas, we plant trees and shrubs to create habitat, forage, and shelter for wildlife. And then we also have a different category for water features that are created through the mining process. So the deeper water features would be pit lakes. So some of the pits that we used in historical operations that are not currently active, they'll naturally fill up with groundwater. And then we are able to go through a reclamation process and make them a suitable habitat for fisheries. So in some of our pits, we have rainbow trout and kokanee fisheries. And then we have the shallower water features, and those would be created on old tailings ponds, so not deep enough to create a fishery, but they do provide valuable wildlife habitat for birds and other species. The picture right here on this side here is our Highmont tailings pond that has been reclaimed as a wetland habitat, and we had a biologist come up and do a 3-year bird survey, and he was able to identify 2/3 of the lists of BC bird species that are typically in the province, either use our site or live on our site. And Highmont is a really useful one because it's a high elevation, shallow pond, which there's not very many of in the area. So it's a very useful stopover point for migratory birds. So this was the inland use plan that we've been working under for, since 1998. And in 2015, we determined that we needed to update our inland use plan. So one of the reasons is with new techniques and technologies that are now known to reclaim sites, there's, more we can do and higher expectations to do a better job. In the past, maybe if you could get something green going on a mine site, like that was good, but now the expectations are certainly higher. But one of the more important drivers for the update is that when we developed this plan in 1998, it was essentially an internal process, and there was no engagement with the Infakatmik Nation or any other community stakeholders. So that really was why we wanted to update our inland use plan. So, excuse me. I'm just going to take a break from the inland use plan topic just to provide a little bit more information on the community engagement structures at Highland Valley Copper. So as I mentioned, Highland Valley is on the traditional territory of the Infakatmik Nation. The Infakatmik Nation has a population of about 6,300 people, and we engage with 15 bands within that nation. So this is just a map showing, this is our operation right here. The yellow line is our area of influence, and then all the dots are the Infakatmik and Secwepemc bands that we engage with. So it's a pretty large area. So the vision around community engagement at Highland Valley is our commitment to being an industry leader in proactive engagement with communities of interest by building trust through collaboration, education, and inclusive dialogue. So some of the things that we do is we try to build respectful relationships through early, inclusive, and ongoing dialogue and collaborative processes. We provide resources to build capacity within the communities. We integrate Indigenous people's perspectives and traditional knowledge into our projects and decision making. We work to achieve free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous people when developing and changing projects. And we work with the Indigenous people to achieve self-defined community goals that provide lasting benefits. So HVC has entered into participation agreements with local First Nations that have been impacted by the mine. Within the Infakatmik Nation, we have 3 agreements that are made up of different groupings of the bands. We have agreement under an organization called Chitwik National Assembly, or CNA, and that's made up of 8 bands. we have an agreement with the Infakapmik Nation Tribal Council, which is made up of 5 bands, and then we have a separate agreement with the Lower Nicola Indian Band. Under the agreements, we have commitments in the following areas. So engagement on projects, so all the regulatory aspects, environmental protection and land use and closure planning, protection of cultural heritage, and employment and contracting. So you can see there that in land use and closure planning is an important one that we've identified and made commitments to the First Nations through these agreements, and really that is the driver for the update. Okay, so back to the land use plan. So under the frameworks of our agreement, we set out to update the land use plan in 2015. To help us with the project, we contracted a consultant called Integral Ecology Group to help us. They specialize in reclamation and do a lot of community engagement, so they were a perfect fit to help us with this project. And early on in the engagement, through discussions with the communities, someone brought up the idea of calling this plan the returning land use plan instead of the inland use plan, to really reflect the intent of this plan to capture feedback from the Infakapmik Nation and have them really guide the plan. So going forward, we named the project the Returning Land Use Plan. So when we kind of set out objectives on how we could do this project really well, we kind of had these 4 objectives that I'm going to get into a little more in the presentation, and why we did it, and how we did these things. So the first one, recognition of Indigenous land. So through engagement, Highland Valley has done on other projects, and through this one, is really evident the importance that the Infakapmik Nation puts on the land and their traditional land uses. So we had a really strong indication from the beginning that that they really wanted to see the land return to a condition where they were able to practice their traditional land uses. And I think it's really important to hear from the Infakapmik Nation on the importance of the land. And I have this short video clip of some First Nations people that can really express this more than I can. So I'll just, hopefully this works and it's loud enough.
Computer.
I'm wondering if. Oh, I see. Can you try it now?
It's not. Yeah.
Lock is where you have the thing that turns on the projector, or you can slide right on that projector.
Be a little software.
Oh, really? Oh, right, yes, gotcha. Yep, got it.
Should be at the bottom there. There, yeah.
Thank
Oh,
you.
there we go.
Well, why don't we just pump it right?
Plug your ears, everyone.
And maybe. Oh, come on. A little.
It's over here. Yeah.
Good stuff.
Okay,
Okay, plug your ears.
I'll try to turn this down here first so that no one gets blown away.
So it's really important that we
Right
approach
here?
land use planning this way, recognition of Indigenous lands. Because our identity is, tied to our specific territory, our language, our culture, our identity, who we are is rooted on the land. For us, reclamation is so much more than, reestablishing plants that are going to be successful there. But it's also approaching it, in a way that honors that different people were there before the line and will be there after the line. And so how can we go about this in a way that promotes reconnection to the land and ensures future generations can use it. So I was really happy that we were able to bring community members in to share a bit of that perspective as well. So before the mine was there, I know that there used to be lakes up there. People fished up there quite a bit for trout. I think the Anderson family and the Wilson family from the Cooks Ferry area, and then people from Coldwater even went out there. Wagons, horseback, before there were roads. So it was a big fishing area. There was Quilpandin Lake and a couple other lakes that are no longer there.
Conquest Lake, before I know there's a summer range, we used to use a net. And one would be on the other side of the ditch, and one on this side, and one up quite a ways up ahead. And we'd slap the water with a stick and keep moving. And the guy with the dipping it would dip out the fish about that size.
I heard lots of stories, and I was around to hear the stories, and basically grew up with the mine being in our backyard of shack. One of the things that I heard was, before the mine came, it was there was a plateau, and there was a travel corridor right through between Ashcroft and Logan Lake that you can see. So before the mine came, there was a great place to hunt. There's lots of lakes around there.
That project is a huge project, and it's done a lot to the land, and it has to be put back to the way it was. Reclamation, sort of rehabilitation for that area, and it's imperative that it has not. I understand it won't go back to what it was, but at least to what can be usable for us and future generations. I do think it's very doable, as long as the people at Highland Valley Tech are willing to work with us.
Well, it's really important.
Okay. So the next area that was important for us in our objectives was, what's here? Oh, in here.
Yeah. Sorry. Another thing that was really important was to ensure that we were able to get meaningful collaboration, so we could really get the feedback that would drive our plan. So key to this was early and ongoing engagement on the project. So we wanted to get the communities involved from the get-go, as opposed to some of the projects and plans that we had done in the past, where we develop a scope and execute a plan or conduct the research and then come up with a technical report and send it out to the First Nations for review and input at that point. And you've really missed the boat there on really capturing what the community wants out of the project. So we worked with the community on the initial planning, the engagement strategy, the development of the plan, and all the way to how we communicated the plan at the end. So we were able to do this by creating two different levels of working groups. So we had the community working group, which is essentially an open invitation to all the Infocatma community members to come out to different meetings and open houses and tours. And with that, we were really happy we were able to get a lot of different levels within the community. So from elders to chiefs to youth. So that was a really important aspect that was communicated to us is to have especially the elders and the youth together. So the elders are able to share information with the youth and pass them on through our projects. So that was important to us. And then we had a technical working group. So we had members from each of our agreements sit in on a technical working group to review the technical aspects of the program, but more importantly, to help us prepare for the community meetings. They helped us with the content, what kind of forum to have it in,
where to have it, all those kind of things. And I felt like this was such a valuable learning process for us. You know, some things that I learned about myself through this is, you know, I've worked in mining for 14 years. So you start to use these technical terms and jargon in your language. And then when you're talking to people that don't know anything about mining, you can create a lot of confusion. An example of that is a waste rock dump. So we talk about waste rock dumps, and then we shorten it to just calling them dumps. And we're talking about dumps here and dumps there and dumps everywhere. And people think we have a bunch of landfills everywhere. So we tried to be really conscious of what we were saying when we were talking to the community. And one tool we did create was a little bit of a glossary to explain some of the technical features in the landscape and things that the communities might not know from their past knowledge. The technical working group's feedback on the presentation was actually really valuable and really humbling. There were times where we, you know, between myself and my consultant, came up with this whole plan for this workshop, and we brought it to the technical working group for feedback, and pretty much had to start from scratch after the feedback. But you know, their input was invaluable in making this really meaningful to the community, and like I thank them so much for the input that they provided through that process. And then with these working groups, we created an engagement schedule. So under each of the agreements, we had 4 community tours or workshops, and then associated technical working groups to plan and prepare for those all within a year. So that ended up being 16 meetings in 1 year for one project, and kind of on the side were a bunch of other ones that we were still having meetings with. So with the communities so you know, I titled the side commitment, and it really shows the commitment kind of on both sides. So it took, you know, like it was a really big part of my job for a year, and also other people in my department, and you know, no pushback at all or concerns given from our management on the amount of effort that I was putting in this, which is really great. And then more importantly, on the community side, you know, all these open houses and meetings, you know, for one aspect of one project where, you know, there's a lot going on in their territory, and the fact that people are coming out on their own time and participating in this really shows that importance they put on it, and the level of commitment. So about 2/3 of the way through our engagement plan, we were evaluating the number of people we were able to reach out through these workshops and open houses. And although we were getting people, we really acknowledged the fact that there's a lot of people that can't come out to community events for, you know, family and jobs. Also, we would hold these events in some of the larger communities within the territory, so example, Lytton and Merritt, but then we're wanting to include input from bands such as Boston Bar that is a significant distance away, and it would be a real effort for people to come out to these events. So we came up with the idea of conducting surveys, and we discussed different methods of doing a survey, like a mail-in survey or like SurveyMonkey, things like that. But we determined that it would be it's really important to have those face-to-face conversations, especially because a lot of these people don't know about a lot about mining or even what an inland use plan was. So we really wanted to be able to provide them with information along with the survey, and really use it as an opportunity to have meaningful dialogue with the communities so that we are able to really capture their concerns and interests on this project, but also other projects related to mining. So we put together a list of questions, and some of the examples of the questions are: what types of land uses would you like the landscape to provide after closure? Would you like to see the land return to how it was prior to mining to the extent possible? And would you like to see the future landscape support economic opportunities such as agriculture? So we were really lucky. I had 2 really great InfoCapMIC interns working for us that year, and they took on this whole survey aspect of the project and went out to different community meetings and events that were already happening so that they could capture people and sit aside and do the surveys, or even go to people's houses and have these meetings if that's what they requested. So I think they had about 2 or 3 months to do this work because it was kind of late in the process, and they were able to get 180 surveys, which was really great and really added to the input to the plan. So the results of the survey and all the engagement is summarized a bit in this slide. So you can see the brown bars are kind of the largest areas of interest for the communities, and these are all traditional land uses that we could achieve through returning the mine site to the ecosystems that existed prior to mining. But then you can also see in yellow that there's still support for agricultural land uses in the area, such as haying and grazing. So the ratio turned out to be about 2/3 support of like the natural ecosystems for traditional land use, and then another 1/3 that we're still interested in the agricultural aspects to and land use plan, which a lot of our reclamation has been. So taking these directives on what the land use goals from the community are, we started to develop our plan, but we wanted to ensure that we were creating a plan that was technically sound and was actually feasible to achieve. So how do you determine what ecosystems a post-closure landscape can actually support? So this is where we had Integral Ecology do some of the technical aspects of the planning. So they did some modeling using our disturbances, like the waste rock and the tailings and the different cover materials we have, as well as topography to estimate the material's ability to hold moisture. And then the material's ability to hold moisture helps predict what ecosystems we should be able to accomplish on the post-closure landscape. So using that information, we began a mapping exercise to develop a plan for the footprint of the mine. So this here shows the footprint of our mine with the new plan on it. So we had completed some pre-mining ecosystem mapping using aerial photos and old surveys. And so we were able to get an understanding of the pre-mining ecosystems that existed. And this became our target. So really wanted to get the diversity of ecosystems and as much as possible the size of those ecosystems back on the landscape to the extent possible. And one thing I was really aware that we needed to communicate to the communities is that although we're working to achieve these natural landscapes, we'll never be able to bring it back to what it was prior to mining due to the extent of a disturbance that mining creates and the materials that we have to reclaim with. So we're really clear because we didn't want to set these expectations that you wouldn't be able to tell that the mine was there. Like that's impossible, but really want to do our best to get these ecosystems down those trajectories towards natural ecosystems. So this map doesn't have all the details, but essentially the green areas are the IDF ecosystems and the red areas are the MS ecosystems that we put on the map based on topography and material types. But you can see the note there that there are fewer wet ecosystems. So some of those we aren't able to replace because of the materials we have for the reclamation. And then there's obviously more mine features that are not going to go away. So the giant pits will always be there. So that's something different. You can also see the yellow areas, and those are the agricultural areas that we placed in our plan. And the locations of those were determined or were based on different features that would make it suitable for agriculture. So that's the 1/3 percentage of support for agriculture. We reflected that in area. Okay, so the next aspect of our goals was to keep it as a living document. So it's not a document that stays the same till closure without any feedback. A lot of the community members weren't really prepared to make a final decision on what they wanted for inland uses for the mine because they just needed to understand the operation and reclamation more. Also, there was people expressed that they didn't want to make choices for the future generation as well. So we made a commitment to return and review the land use plan every 5 years to make sure we're still capturing and aligned with the community goals. And so what did we do to ensure the continuity of the project in the years between between the updates. So I passed around some of the photo books for you guys to look at while I'm talking, and this was one of the tools we wanted to use to kind of spread the story of what we were doing and keep the conversation going. So we developed this idea of a photo book as opposed to a technical report that no one wants to read. So we wanted to make sure it was, attractive and engaging, and people wanted to look at it to keep the story going. And this is just a clip from inside the book. We wanted to also use this as an opportunity to continue information on the traditional land uses going forward. And then you can see some of it has been translated into Infocatchin, which is the Infocat Nation language, to kind of foster learning within the community. We also wanted to make it like technical aspects not, overwhelming and more easy to read. So this is a map that we had in our technical report that breaks down all the ecosystem and has lots of details. And we took this and turned it into maps that look like this. So simplified versions, things lumped together, and then instead of just the list of the ecosystem, included pictures and a list of species that they would be able to find in those ecosystems, and land uses associated with those ecosystems. We also wanted to make it meaningful because maybe a lot of people don't know what these ecosystems are, but throughout the engagement, they identified a lot of important traditional plants that we should use in our reclamation program. So we had someone model where those plants would grow on the post-closure landscape, just to provide a little bit more meaning to the project, and that was done by a community member as well. And then finally, another way to keep this as a living document is to take the feedback that we learned from doing the update of the plan and start doing research. So we have a new land use plan. There's new ecosystems that we need to create, so we need to start researching to finding the best ways to develop those on the landscape. We've developed a research trial that we're starting this year, looking at using different soil amendments, cover depth, site preparation techniques, and species to achieve these in land use plans. And that one, TRU, is actually involved with a greenhouse trial to help inform that field trial. Another one is that I heard a lot from the communities on the importance of fire in their traditional practices, and a lot of suggestions that we should start to bring back burning into our reclamation program to see if we can use it to get some more native species growing into grasslands. So we've developed a trial for that, and we're going to be burning it this spring. And when we go back and talk to the communities about the research that we're doing, and we reflect back to this is the feedback that we heard from you, I think it develops trust, and that they understand that we're listening, and we're actually not just talking to them to check a box, but we really want to get their feedback and apply it to our planning. And then finally, we wanted it to be meaningful to the community, and I can say, yeah, it was meaningful to the community, but that's really best comes from the community member. So I have one more video clip here that I'll play that just has some reflections from the community member on the project. If I can remember how to do this. There we go, I'm a pro now.
Drop it halfway. And then on your own, volume.
This one up.
A lot of the success of the end land use plan was, really attributed to all the community input that we had. And, part of that is the relationship that we've built with Highland Valley Copper. And also their commitment to doing good engagement. So, what I really liked about this process was there was a lot of opportunity for, that community level grassroots conversation to feed into how we develop the plan to our community working group. But we're also able to lend our own technical expertise at the technical table as well. So it was a really integrated approach to end land use planning. A lot of people hadn't been up there since, the mine had been, really established. So for them to come back and see the space and kind of look forward, I think was really meaningful as well. In addition to that, they also had, community members going out and conducting a survey. That piece of going out into the community is really key, right? It's not always about, us going to the mine and, talking to them that way, but it's also about them coming into our communities and being a part of that. And that really, gives it an informed dialogue and a really meaningful approach. And so that was front end, which was, really great work. And at the tail end, with the development of the photo book being this visual resource to the communities to understand what we were trying to achieve, where we were going, I think was really meaningful as well. Because, a technical report, that's going to mean nothing to the average community member. But having something out in the communities that we can continually engage on really supports people engaging into that process and that reconnection that I talked about, right? So it triggers a question, what is this book? What was this work? And then as we begin to, update the plan every 5 years, it just gets stronger and stronger and also feeds into the reconnection to the space as we look towards closure.
So I should have mentioned that the lady that was speaking there, her name is Tamlin Botel, and she is an Infocatmet community member, but was also on the technical working group for the project. So just to conclude, I just want to acknowledge all the amazing people that I got to work with on this project. So Tamlin, who we saw speak, and the rest of the technical working group, the Infocatmet community members that came out and shared really valuable knowledge and their time and really made this a meaningful project. Integral Ecology Group, who's my amazing consultant that, helped out a lot with this and really was open to letting the community drive the work. The rest of the people in my department that supported this, and then a little bit of shout out to Daryl Shuttlesworth, who did the illustrations for this presentation and in the photo book. So yeah, that's all I have. If anyone has any questions.
Thank you very much, Jaimie. Here's time for questions.
I do. So, Carl Larson involved in the PICA project. I just first want to say this is such a complicated task. So kudos to you guys for working so hard to integrate everything. It's a great example. But as a wildlife person, I guess I'm wondering, and I know you've talked and focused on the wildlife, but would you say there's end goals in that direction for only specific species, or does the concept of biodiversity work its way in?
Yeah, it's mainly based on biodiversity. We have talked about kind of a next step on this is to do some modeling for species, and that will kind of be part of the specific reclamation prescriptions for the area, and like using that modeling to design it for wildlife as well.
Yeah, I'm Mike Dadles. I'm invasive plant coordinator now, but I was the range guy in the area in the 90s. And then First Nations weren't really involved with the plan. The resource folks got together with environment and talked about desires and argued about whether it should be agriculture or wildlife. But how do you balance the desires of the more remote bands, like the Boston Bar folks who really don't have a big connection with Highland Valley, with those like Cook's Ferry who are right next door and are more tied to it?
Yeah, there's aspects in our agreements that address some of the various levels of impacts, but with this process, we really opened it up to everyone. And in the discussion I had with the grad students prior to this meeting, we had some questions on what would happen if there was like conflicting goals and people wanted different things, and I was a little bit worried about that. But on this one, everyone was really aligned with what they want. And also it's a really big area, so we're able to, meet a lot of people's expectations for land use. It gets a little bit more complicated on other projects, things that kind of related to inland use plan, like access to the land and, like who's managing the land at closure. That's where it gets really complicated. But at this point, we haven't gotten into those details. I imagine the next go around of this will be in 2020, and at that point we're approximately 8 years from closure, and that's when we really kind of have to get more of the detail in land use in the closure plan, and that might be a bit more complicated.
And were they in general agreement over what to do with the feral horse herd there?
Yeah, I might not be in agreement, but
That was actually a question I was going to follow up on, Mike, because I wondered how specific the surveys were and how detailed, and whether, specific questions were asked on, what sort of amendment would you prefer, or what about the feral horses?
Yeah. No, this didn't get into that detail, and it wasn't really a scientific survey. It was pretty general, just trying to get people's ideas. But really, from early indications, we knew what the desire was. It was to return the land back to what it was before, and that was kind of the main driver. So it's just kind of fine tuning like percentages and stuff. But when you get into the details on things like it, then it gets a little bit more specific.
Just were you able to integrate traditional knowledge in the project, and did that work well with Western knowledge?
Yeah, this one, we did try to incorporate it. It wasn't as applicable to actual planning, but we do in some of our reclamation programs, for example, like prescribed burning, and a lot of feedback through this process on our reclamation planning and traditional knowledge. And we kind of right when this one was starting another project that was as cool as this one was ending, and that one was really more about that integrating traditional knowledge. And that one, we were looking at the impacts of dust on traditional plants. And in that one, it was really also driven from the get-go from the community, so they helped in the design. And some of the things that we did for that one is we got the elders to show us how they would collect berries. So when we went out and did our sampling, we would mimic those techniques so that we were really getting exactly what they would be eating and analyzing that. So they went out on the land and showed us, like sometimes they would take like a tarp or an umbrella, put it under a bush, and we were focused on soapberry for this, and beat the bush with a stick, and then the berries would fall onto the whatever device they had under there, and they would make their teas and juices with that. And then we got them to also show us how they process the berries, and then mimic those techniques and analyze those, and compared washed versus unwashed. So I guess that's not as much like kind of science, but more addressing concerns based from the community. And there's other aspects within that. So we tried to as much as possible, but it was kind of hard for this one because it wasn't super technical. But when we get into the detailed stuff, we try to.
Sorry, for questions, and just wait, the video can't pick up unless you're speaking. So can you just hold on?
Is anyone planning on living on that land, or just in the future just going for day trips or spending excursions on it, or is there an intent of actually going back and establishing settlements or longer term living?
Yeah, that was kind of a difficult question, and I got a lot of questions like that, like who's going to be able to live here at closure. So the majority of the mine site is like mineral leases from the government. So we don't own the land. There are some small pockets that we do own, but we're always going to have the liability associated with the land, but I don't really think we get to make that decision on what happens prior or post closure. We'll have to meet our commitments in terms of reclamation and monitoring, but then that land essentially goes back to the Crown. So I'm not sure how that process all goes, and be interesting to see if other mines in the area kind of get to that stage, but it's going to be a long time before we are able to reclaim and get rid of those commitments. We'll probably be able to create a plan and then kind of closer to closure on access to different areas. So we've created fisheries on the site that we could kind of segregate off from many of the risky areas like pits and dams, and provide access and provide opportunities for the First Nations to manage those resources. But I'm not sure about living per se.
Jaimie, for things like the ongoing commitments for reclamation in the future, how does the budgeting of that work? So there are obviously going to be costs built into these various reclamation initiatives. Is there a fund that's being paid into? Are there assessments of kind of what, like going hand in hand with this, I'm assuming there are assessments of what all this will cost.
Yeah.
How is that being paid for?
Yeah, so that's kind of two parts. The mine has something called decommissioning and reclamation provisions. So we need to do detailed cost estimates of for all of closure, not only reclamation, but decommissioning, water treatment, all those things. So we have a process where we estimate those costs, and then our corporate office kind of puts that money aside. And I don't know really how that process works. That's more on the accountant side, but we have to provide them that information so that they can account for that money. But the Ministry of Energy and Mines also requires us to pay a bond based on what our closure costs are, and so we pay that up front. So ours is actually just in the process of being updated. So it was pretty low in the past, and they kind of kept kind of big mining companies that are kind of BC based and have a good reputation. Our bond was really low, but they've changed that now, and I think it's kind of all post Mount Poly to bonding us to our full liability, so the cost for closure. So Teck has money set aside, but the government also has bonds, so it's kind of covered under two buckets. And you'd only use that bond from the government if we walked away from the project. And we have to update those costs actually quarterly, so it's pretty comprehensive.
One last quick question out there that's begging to be asked. I was just wondering if you had, or were collecting any data to support or an estimate, something in the works of you mentioning the large pit that's there, to have that filled with water in the future. If you had anything for a timeline of that.
Yeah, we're actually just updating a lot of those numbers. We're doing a lot of modeling on our water and our water quality right now, but our old estimates that kind of some of our older costing was based on was, I think they had an assumption of 100 years, which I don't know if it's based on. A lot of those old assumptions were based on not much. So we're in the process right now of updating a lot of that modeling and water treatment costs so that we can get better costs to feed into our DRP.
Right. Well, thanks so much, Jaimie, for kicking off this semester and also giving us such a great example of Indigenous community engagement. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.